All right, welcome back to the Something Venture podcast. This is Kent Lindstrom. We'll get started in just a second. This time we're going to do another two-parter, this time a little more serious than last time, talking about the structure of Silicon Valley's labor market, in particular talking about engineers, a topic that is garnering enormous attention lately. On the supply side, the concept that there's very few engineers in Silicon Valley, and on the demand side, the frustration from technology firms that they can't hire the people to accomplish what they want to accomplish. So this one gets a little bit rough. It's in two episodes. The first one, we kind of talk about what changes to the market we think could occur, temporal, things like over time, bubbles burst, and sort of global, meaning every engineer in the world doesn't have to be in Silicon Valley, and that's changing fast. I wanted to, and then the second part, though, if you're an engineer and you're listening, you're getting a bit discouraged, which I doubt you would be, but hang around the second one coming next week. We actually give some pretty solid advice, maybe not as well said as we could, but taken from some really smart people about how to organize a career in Silicon Valley to really maximize your wealth. But after we did this podcast out in the Wall Street Journal, I want to attribute that. The Wall Street Journal, Bill Gurley, a very famous, very successful venture capitalist from Benchmark Capital, did an interview in the Wall Street Journal that was the most widely shared story on Nuzzle. That's the social news site founded by Jonathan Abrams, the company for which I work. And I'll just read you a brief quote from him talking about the bubble that he believes may be going on right now in Silicon Valley as it pertains to working at Silicon Valley companies. And then we'll let you go with Jim Egbert, who we're interviewing. Jim is one of the big executives in Silicon Valley in the payment space. He works for one of the big payment processors. There's like 4 or 5 of these things in the country, and they all have a deep presence here in Silicon Valley. Anyway, Bill Gurley, quoted in the Wall Street Journal real briefly, he says, quote, "I guarantee 2 things. 1, the average burn rate at the average venture-backed company in Silicon Valley," now we're here in September of 2014, in Silicon Valley is at an all-time high since 1999, and maybe in many industries higher than in 1999. And 2, more humans in Silicon Valley are working for money-losing companies than I have seen in 15 years, and that's a form of discounted risk. In 2001 or 2009, you just wouldn't go take a job at a company that's burning $4 million a month. Today, everyone does it without thinking. And he concludes by saying, again, quote, Bill Gurley from the Wall Street Journal, "So risk just keeps going higher, higher, and higher. The problem is that because you get there slowly, the correcting is really hard and catastrophic. Right now, the cost of capital is super low here. If the environment were to change dramatically, the types of gymnastics that it would require companies to readjust their spend is massive. So I worry about it constantly." All right, thanks for coming back. Thanks for listening. Without further ado, this is Something Ventured with Jim Egbert. All right, welcome. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I'm your host. My guest today, Jim Egbert. How are you doing?
I'm good. And yourself?
Excellent. It's good to have you here.
It's good to be here.
This is the Something Ventured podcast, where I take a look behind the scenes in Silicon Valley as I sit down with the people who are shaping the way we view the world online and beyond. And Jim, this is an interesting talk today. Jim has worked both in technology and not in technology, and has worked at companies both in the large companies and small companies, startups, 2 to 3 people, huge software companies, and has done that both in the U.S. and overseas in Europe.
Yes,
and I've done that too. I've run an international software development firm, so this should be kind of interesting. We're going to talk about. I couldn't really figure out how to describe this, but sort of like how engineering labor works, the market for talent, Silicon Valley versus the rest of the world. I did want to say first, so the last episode I talked about Burning Man.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, and it was a few people asked me this week, like, am I mad at Burning Man because we made fun of it? So I just wanted to say we're just having a little bit of fun at the expense of Burning Man last week. I actually think Burning Man's pretty cool. I kind of want to go.
It should be done. I mean, I think it's a checkbox. If you're in the Bay Area, it's a checkbox that has to happen.
Yeah, we were making fun of the joke was that most people who describe Burning Man to me sound suspiciously like what high school kids sound like when they're describing their first experience with drugs or reading an Ayn Rand novel. And we're just having a little fun with the joke of, the big thing this year was a bunch of rich people showed up at at Burning Man, and of course, Burning Man costs $500, and you have to be able to take a week off work to go. It's always been rich people. It's not a bunch of migrant workers going there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't even necessarily have to be rich, apparently. I had a gentleman who will remain nameless who has worked for me. He worked for me a year ago, and he was in Ibiza. And he was hanging out with some friends in Ibiza.
Yeah.
And one of the people he was hanging out with said, "Hey, listen, we want to go to Burning Man." So they jumped on a private jet and flew into the airstrip, and he got to hang out at Burning Man.
Wow.
And he bypassed SFO and then
Holy
straight back
cow.
here. So I don't know that you have to be rich even. You just have to know the rich people,
You just have to
right?
be hanging out with the rich people in Ibiza.
Yeah.
That's pretty funny. The other funny thing I was just thinking about this week too is the rich people who showed up. The thing was that they were hanging out in RVs, which of course is kind of funny. That only in Silicon Valley do you think an RV is something like a rich guy does, right? Like RVs is like the ultimate middle class.
Well, it depends upon the RV, right? So, another interesting story, a young lady that I got to know through an individual that worked for me, her dad was in Oklahoma City, and he sold RVs, but he sold high-end custom RVs. These are the engineered solutions kinds. You push the button, the side goes out, and it becomes pretty impressive stuff. And he had a guy walk on the lot with his wife, and they were looking for a high-end RV, a couple of them. And so her dad started talking to the guy and wound up selling him 2 RVs. And the guy turned around and said, "Listen, how much do you want to continue to sell RVs? Would you rather be a driver?" And so, be a driver. Well, what would I be driving for? He said, "Well, you'd be driving for me." And turns out the guy that he did take the job. The guy that he was driving for is Steve Miller of the Steve Miller Band. Yep, no kidding.
That's fantastic.
A byproduct of that is I got to meet Steve Miller and spend some time with him, which was pretty cool.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so that's the Burning Man wrap up. I'm not mad at Burning Man. We were having a little bit of fun. Don't take yourself too seriously if you go. It's a party in the desert,
right? And
I do hope to be part of it at some point because it seems cool. So why don't we edge into this? I just read this week that at Harvard University, the Engineering 101 has become the #1 class that in terms of people taking it. It used to be something like Econ 101, and something like 900 people now are taking the Engineering Computer Sciences class at Harvard.
Sure, it makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, if you want to be an engineer, obviously you got to start somewhere. But probably more importantly, if you want to be an entrepreneur or you're on that track, you want to understand engineering. And you probably have run into this. I know CEOs that are not engineers, that don't have an engineering bone in their body that can write code.
Yeah.
And they want to learn because they want to understand they want to learn the basics so they understand what the capabilities are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not either an engineer, but I am a fan and have always worked with engineers and appreciate what they do. The crazy thing that's happened here and in Silicon Valley and everyone's wringing their hands about is that it's become incredibly difficult to recruit engineers. The price of people with 2 or 3 years of experience is something, if you're listening to this around the world, I know this sounds crazy, but it's true, $130,000, $140,000, $150,000 for an engineer with 2 to 3 years of experience. I mean, it's almost like an investment banking kind of a salary for someone who hasn't worked for very long.
Oh yeah, I mean it's we talked earlier, about when I was in Europe. First of all, you say, it's difficult. Well, it's virtually impossible here.
Right.
It is very hard to find good talent on the street. Mm-hmm. And the cost has continued to skyrocket. And of course, you have the recruiters and the tech recruiters in there, which are stirring the pot constantly, constantly calling in to recruit people. And so what you've done is you've gotten to this sort of lowest possible common denominator, which is, to your point, a year out. Mm-hmm. Maybe just graduated well, 2 years out. And the interview process now isn't even, can you write me some code? It's, can you just understand the basics so I can instruct you to write some code? Mm-hmm. Now you see these checks and balances occurring in these companies where you've got 2 engineers looking at the same screen.
Right.
And so now, to your point, you've got $260,000 a year invested with one person coding and the other sort of looking at the code, trying to understand it and learn from it. So it's gotten completely out of sight. I can only imagine it's not getting better.
Right.
It's getting worse, I think, if anything. Yeah. And I think it is, as we've talked before, it creates incredible opportunity if you're smart and you're a good entrepreneur to set up shop in other parts of the world and get great talent at reasonable prices. Yeah,
and that's one of the things I wanted to explore, which is that if you start looking at the system, Silicon Valley. Obviously, every developer in the world can't come to Silicon Valley. Like, there's not that much room for people here. And
Doesn't feel like it now, though, does it?
yeah, exactly.
I think they're 3 to a room now.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. That was the other joke, too, is that, like, San Francisco is supposed to have some, incredible, and does have an incredible, I shouldn't make fun of it, shortage of housing, and, like, there's people, jammed in here, and the city's ruined. Then 15,000 people go to Burning Man. The town's a ghost town. So
remember, it's 7 miles by 7 miles, right?
Yeah,
so
it's a small place,
you sleep 3 people to a room, which is happening, and then everybody decides to leave. Yeah, you wind up with a pretty quiet weekend.
Yeah. So if you start looking at the system, these systems are never stable. In other words, that scenario isn't going to go on forever. Salaries aren't going to go to $900,000 a year for somebody with 2 years of experience. It happened in the aerospace industry, and I thought we'd go through a couple of kind of macro things that maybe are going to happen that are going to change this. And the first one that you allude to, of course, is globalization. And I think what probably happens, I'm guessing, and this is what happened with my last company, is you get to the point where you would much prefer to have an engineer working for you in Silicon Valley, but there's some price, there's some amount of time it takes to hire that person where you can't do it. And the cost of managing somebody who lives, we had a group of people in Ohio. They were fabulous Ruby on Rails engineers. They just wanted to live in Ohio with their families, and they went to Ohio State and they loved it. Where it just seems that the cost of managing that person offshore, we call that near shore in Ohio, just sort of becomes worth it, right? Yes, it is a pain in the ass to manage someone who's not here, but at some point things break.
There's so many variables, right? I mean, get me started, right? So you spend an incredible amount of time to try to find the talent and bring them in.
Yep.
Then you spend an incredible amount of time and money to get them up to speed on your product.
Yeah.
Then you spend an incredible amount of time, money, effort, and energy to entertain them.
Yeah.
And what I mean by entertain them is take them for drinks on Wednesdays and Fridays, take them go-kart racing, take them to the ball game, make sure that they've got 3 square meals a day, which, by the way, the IRS looks like they're going to tax that now. Which will be yet another cost, right? So that'll be an employee perk that'll be taxed.
Right.
So keep them entertained, keep them happy, give them a romper room style environment to, so they've got ping pong and foosball and, pop shot basketball. And I've seen offices with Nerf dart guns.
Right.
So you keep them entertained and happy, and only to find out that the technical recruiter is calling in, and backdooring you and offering them an extra $15,000 or $20,000 to go someplace else.
Yeah, right.
So you've got this unsustainable cycle that's happening, and it's happening here. This is not happening in other places. It is happening here. It's not even happening in other places in the United States, let alone when we talk about getting outside of the United States.
Yeah. We had at my previous company, we had a great workforce, fantastic people working in Ohio. But their other choices were, things like, they were fine choices, but it was a normal set of job opportunities. They could work at the university, Procter & Gamble's located there. There were some other options, but there weren't sort of 4,000 deceptively good options, because something I want to talk about too is sort of how a lot of people manage their careers in Silicon Valley, which is
or lack thereof,
which is shockingly suboptimal. So talk about what was it like running something in Europe? Like how you had a series of developers in were you Budapest?
Yeah, I was in Budapest. It was incredible. So just to give everybody an idea, you get over to Budapest and you think, wow, okay, so these people speak Hungarian, which is arguably one of the most difficult languages. It's Magyar, actually.
Okay.
Very difficult language to learn and speak. And in fact, that's not the case. Every one of these engineers are very fluent in English. Mm-hmm. My head architect was an incredibly savvy, smart guy, probably 28 years old. And he could hire up a team, no problem. We had a recruiter who brought him in right out of school.
Wow.
We'd go over to Macedonia and bring him in because it was better living conditions in Budapest. And you figure this out. 8 years ago, we were writing in Ruby and Rails.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We were writing for the cloud.
Yep.
And we had a cloud-based CRM platform for expat document management.
Right.
8 years ago.
Yeah.
With a bunch of engineers out of Budapest who were incredibly brilliant.
Wow.
And we did it at, I'd say, about a fifth of the cost.
Holy cow.
A sixth of the cost of what it would take here. We didn't have to buy them lunch.
Right.
They worked in a normal office. Mm-hmm. We didn't have any Nerf guns. We didn't have any Pop-A-Shot. There was no ping pong or foosball table. Right. In fact, interestingly, we had a biometric scanner, and they scanned in When they came in the morning, they scanned out for lunch, scanned back in from lunch, and scanned when they left.
It's like a time clock.
Like a time clock. That's right. And these guys came in and they went straight to work. And every morning there was an engineering session. Everybody knew what they had to work on, and we were pushing code like you wouldn't believe.
Wow.
We built that platform in 4 months, all in. Incredible, right? And then we had a fix that we needed to do, which was to make that platform multilingual. Very hard thing to do, by the way. Yeah. So it shows up in English and English-speaking countries, and all the input and headers show up in Chinese in a Asian country or in China, and we had to do that. And actually, here's the difference, right? We were told by Ford that they wanted to roll this out globally. Yeah. And that became a big issue for them, right? Right. So you can imagine what it looks like in Russia. And I sat down with our head architect, and I said, David, his name is David. I said, I don't even know what to do. I said, this is a big deal. Sure. And this was a Friday afternoon. And he just sat and he looked at me and he said, just let me think about it. And I left the office about 7:30 that night, and he was still there sort of on a whiteboard. I got back in the office about 7:15 Monday morning, and there was David. And David was in the same clothes that I'd left him in Friday night.
Holy cow.
There were pizza boxes on the floor. And I walked in, and he tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, come on into the conference room. And we went in and sat down. And he had solved the problem, and he had written the code, and he had deployed the code through test and then into prod.
Wow.
It was amazing.
That's incredible.
And you know what the big thank you was for that? I said, what can I do for you and your family? Obviously it was your entire weekend. And he said, no, nothing. I got him a $100 American Express gift card, and you would have thought I gave him a car.
Wow.
And there's the difference right there.
Yeah. That's incredible.
The expectation level is completely different. I'm not going to say that the talent level is different. I think we've got great engineers here. Yeah. But I think there's also very good engineers all over the world.
Yeah.
But the level of expectation of what an employer should be providing and the atmosphere is completely different. Yeah. And the level of effort and energy put into the actual work and the seriousness about it, in my humble opinion, is night and day.
Yeah. Well, it's a fantastic perspective. I think one of the things I learned when we had our global company, and I too think there's great talent in Silicon Valley, and I think there's reasons for certain companies to have their teams all here in Silicon Valley, or have part of your team here. And I think that's an issue that people kind of mix up a little bit. A lot of people have come to the conclusion this is the capital city, which is true, but that doesn't mean that and you know who does this? The Israeli guys do this. There are certain Israeli engineers who do this where they're here, their management team is here because they need to be here next to the capital, next to the networking and all of those things. But they have a team of people back in Israel. And so while they're getting the advantage of being in Silicon Valley, their CEO, they've also concluded that not every engineer up and down the line at their company also needs to be in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can't think of a reason where you would need to have 100% of your engineering talent here anymore. Now, I think if you're a startup, and for those of you out there who it's you and your friend from college and there's the two of you or three of you, yeah, that's 100% of your engineering talent. Makes perfect sense. Yeah. But when you start to scale your business, I can't think of a reason to do it anymore. The level of talent out there is every bit as good. The education is every bit as good. And like I said, the expectation level is very different. I work today in a variety of capacities with several companies, all of whom have incredible shops, 100-plus engineers outside of the United States. We've got one company has them in Sri Lanka, another one has a couple of them in India, another one in Slovenia, and it is incredible the speed at which they can develop product and get it out into the market. Yep. And again, at a cost that is a fifth of what we're paying here, without all the issues of being recruited out and having to supply this crazy atmosphere. Now, what these guys have done that I think is very interesting, to your point, is they've had to figure out a company culture, because you've got to manage a company outside of the United States, right? Yeah. So you've got to figure out, how do I take my culture that's here, that I'm trying to develop in Silicon Valley, and that's what people are investing in, and how do I drive that into my remote engineering pods around the world? And what they're doing is they're rotating them through, and they're rotating them through all of them. not just leaders, all of them. They're rotating them through for a series of time, and then they're sending them back. So when they go back, they take some of that culture with them, and they understand how things are working here, and they understand it over there.
Yeah.
And that model is working extremely well right now.
Yeah. And then, maybe there's something great about this too, that people, who is it, Mark Andreessen, or I shouldn't attribute this if it's wrong, but has this idea that, there's so much to be done in technology that we should have 50 Silicon Valleys, all over the planet. Like we should have a drone valley and a Bitcoin valley and, deploy the talented developers everywhere in the world, not just the small subset who has the resources and the inclination to come here to San Francisco. There's a couple companies in what we were doing, which was we were doing Ruby on Rails consulting. Ohio was one. Florida was another one. There's a shop there. I won't mention the name, but like a really good Ruby on Rails shop in Florida. It's just literally people who are very talented, but their family's there, and for whatever reason they need to be there. They're there. They're great developers, and they're pretty happy to be working on interesting projects and living, where they're living, going to their, being in the community that they're in. And it seems that cycling people through Silicon Valley, which does have special attributes and DNA, and then having those people go back to Singapore, go back to India, go back to Russia, actually could start changing the way the world looks in terms of where the talent develops and how these clusters occur.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that whoever said that, whether it was Mark or not, I think they're 100% right. If you have not been outside of the United States on engineering business where you've been into one of these pods, I urge whoever you are out there, get out there and go see one. And if you don't know who to go see or you need an introduction, ping Kent and I'll get you one. What they're doing is incredible work, and there is no reason that you shouldn't have this happening all over the United States, all over North America, right? I mean, here we are talking about very distant countries, which I think makes it sound very interesting and alluring. But why isn't this happening in Alberta? Yeah. Why isn't this happening in Winnipeg? Yeah. Why isn't this happening in other areas of the country where you're starting to see some industry diminish?
Yep.
And you can very easily set up shop at a reasonable cost and put good talent in there. Yeah. There's a lot of work to do. There's so much work to do that the engineers today can't get it done.
Yeah, and the world will be a better place because it's not like there's a limited supply of things that need to be done.
No.
And I think the interesting thing that this person said that I'm not attributing well is he said, and if you have to do it through regulatory means. Like maybe drones aren't going to be okay in San Francisco because we don't want drones flying around. Maybe that's okay in Utah, that they become Drone Valley. And if you want to fly drones around, you pick on Utah or whoever, Detroit, someone like that takes it up. So I think it feels to me that as we become more comfortable as a single globe, as people have already done manufacturing overseas, moved it onshore, moved offshore, moved it back onshore, maybe that same thing will happen with development talent, that we'll more reasonably tap that talent all over the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that is certainly a trend that's coming. There's a group that I worked with in Slovenia, and the guy who was the CEO of that group is an incredibly smart guy. Had a Y Combinator company, came out of there, launched it. I actually wound up working with him in New York a little bit, and we were coming up literally probably with 2 to 3 ideas a week.
Yeah.
And he had a series of engineers back in Slovenia,
right,
and they could go to town on any one of those ideas, and in 6 weeks have a product stood up that was every bit as good as what you'd imagine. And one of the ideas was sort of a sharing economy in a different space, but they were able to emulate an Airbnb style product in 6 weeks, up running in a production environment.
Wow.
At, like I said, a fifth of the cost.
Yeah.
And they were just as happy as could be. What I haven't seen is anybody be very good at setting that up independently and then bringing it here to our shores and walking down Sand Hill Road and saying, hey, you've got entrepreneurs with good ideas. You've got entrepreneurs in residence with good ideas.
Yeah.
We've got a resource for you.
Yeah.
And we can do it. We can protect you, and we can protect your we can protect your trademarks. We can protect all of your knowledge. We can do all that legally. We're not in a country where you're going to have to worry about that, and we're going to do it cost effectively.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen anybody do that, which just blows me away. Yeah. It really does.
Well, who does it? What's interesting is Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has a favorite book, and I'll go back and I'll annotate it to this podcast. I forget what the book is, but it's the name of the book. But the concept of the book is about competing on time. and basically that you're not competing on cost so much, but you're building a more efficient, better system than everybody else so you can beat them to market. That is, the cycle for your phone is 18 months, your competitor's 24 months. You're always in the market first, and you're kind of kicking their butt. So Apple's doing it. They're just doing it on the manufacturing side, not the development side. But it seems that somebody's going to, a lot of people are figuring out, but people figure it out on the development side. Well, I can do that for engineering too. I can tap talent around the world, tap a global force, and become a more effective engineering and development organization. If I'm not Facebook, who has the power to hire as many, who has the power and capital to hire as many people as they want right here in Silicon Valley, and don't have to screw around with,
Well, so there's a key, right? Is the power, is the capital? How many great ideas are there out there today that are not going to make it to the market, or will make it to the market years from now because they don't have the capital to get the resources? And what you're talking about at Apple doing, we did. My former employer, I was 10 years there, and we had an engineering solutions division that I ran globally. And as we acquired companies, we peeled off or carved out pods of engineers. Now, this was not software; this was hardware stuff. And we would move products and they're around the world. Would move the products around the world every day. Right. So you had these teams that passed off in the evening to whoever was just waking up.
Yeah,
and that happened 3 times. Right. And so every day you were working 24 hours, around the clock to get a product to market.
Yeah.
And we were first to market all the time. New, more innovative, lower cost, better. And to your point, why haven't we figured that out in engineering?
Yeah.
It's not hard to do.
Right.
And why aren't we finding ways to do that? And here I am saying, God, it's surprising to me that nobody's come to our shores and said, hey, I've got this resource. Mm-hmm. Probably what's even more surprising, really the proper way to look at it, is why haven't any of us gone and figured this out?
Yeah. All right, so why don't we pause that one right there? By the way, for those of you who are younger, that sound that you hear there, that is a record scratching. Used to be used to indicate something ending, but only ending temporarily. Anyway, that one was that was a little bit of a reality check there, I think, on that podcast of how employers might view the labor market right now. Stick around for the next one. Next week, we continue our conversation with Jim, and in that episode, we give some, I think, pretty interesting, pretty good advice on how to organize a career in Silicon Valley to maximize your happiness, frankly, how to maximize your wealth. Anyway, this has been the Something Ventured podcast. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next week.